Welcome to episode 4 of the welding table build. In the first episode I built the frame, in the second one I built the outriggers and attached the slats that form the tabletop. In episode 3 I built the folding legs. In this episode I'm fixing a mistake, reinforcing the legs, doing some fine tuning and seeing how level I can get the top. Stay tuned for some madcap fun! Disclaimer, might not be fun, no madcap. Morning guys and gals, another day in the Empire of Dirt. Hopefully this is going to be the last day. I tried to come out here yesterday and fix it, but I was just too knackered. Anyway, enough complaining. I hope we can finish off the little details today. So, as per YouTube, let's get on with it. Or let's get started, or let's do this, the things. Here I'm using the Dremel with a tiny cutting disc to grind in the Roman numerals onto the slats and frame. As there's currently 8 slats, I decided to number them from the center outwards in each direction, just in case I add some more later. From left to right the numbers are VII, VIII, III, IV, VI, VIII. I guess the Romans discarded the more logical Arabic numerals due to their love of using the Dremel tools. I can't think of another benefit. Anyway, with the slats numbered, I have a much better chance of getting them back in the original order. Welcome to the inside of my brain. I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight of what it is like to be me and try to make things perfect. This here is the tab for the leg. This one. Obviously the other one is on that side, so you can't see that one. But when I welded this on, I clamped it to the U-channel. And the U-channel's sides are not parallel. I knew this, I forgot about it, I didn't care about it. The end result is now that these are slightly splaying outwards. The distance at the bottom here is something like 600.5 millimeters, whereas at the top it's something like 604 point something. A lot of this is due to that the angle iron, which is the pivot point, is not perpendicular to the U-channel, and it can be illustrated by doing this jiggly movement here. So the easiest way to deal with this would be to bolt the legs on, and whilst doing that you somehow stick in some washers in here between there, and you probably never take them off and everything would be fine. Another way to deal with it is to weld on some plates or shims either onto the leg or onto here to compensate for the splay outiness. However, the correct way of doing it is to remove the angle iron and re-weld it parallel to this surface. And another slightly better way than the shims, but not the perfect way, is to cut this side of the angle iron and bend them in to suit this one. Now annoyingly, this one is about 598 millimeters, give or take, which means that even if I bend this parallel to the bottom what it should be, it's not going to be absolutely perfect. So I'm sitting here now in a situation where there isn't a perfect solution, which means that my brain is going to have to accept a compromise, and a compromise is a situation where nobody is happy. It's total overkill to start bending these in, where I could just weld a piece of flat bar on this one and drill a hole. However, that's not really how my head works, so I think I'm gonna have to cut these, and then I will probably clamp them to the legs, and then I will weld them up again. Hopefully that should somewhat satisfy my inner perfectionist. Yeah. End of Inside Brain tour. Quite often when fabric cobbling, I have to pick up the grinder and grind something to proceed to the next stage. I know that picking up and putting down tools takes a long time, so I tend to shape and grind other welds nearby when I see them. I find that this saves time in the long run, but it also often the case that I have the workpiece turned in a position where I can see welds that I wouldn't otherwise see. If I didn't grind them then and there, these would then be left as is, and I'd have to not only pick up the tool again, but also turn the workpiece around to get to those untreated welds. Hence my tip is to grind what you see when you're holding your tool. This tip might also apply to other aspects in life. I've been going around the table tidying up the welds and cutting corners, not that sort of cutting corners, but angling the corners to make it look a little bit pretty. I've done one set of legs and I'm pretty happy with them, and now I'm onto these set of legs. I did weld a little bit of a reinforcement on the other legs, and it seemed to have made quite a big difference. As I'm now working on these legs, I noticed that there was a little bit of flex here. So my plan is now that I'll make a bit of an angle iron that sits in here. I've checked with the pivoting mechanism that it should work alright, so I'm gonna basically bridge these two with that one there, and hopefully that will add a lot of strength to this one. But otherwise it's progressing quite nicely. Part of my organic engineering approach is that I first build things in a functional manner. I often leave excess material in place and focus on the strength, the functionality, and all those practical aspects. Once I'm happy that it works the way I want it to, I begin to shape it and trim off the fat if you want. I often remove excess material in corners and such. For example, in this time lapse you'll see that the reinforcement pieces were initially square. But having realized that there's a huge part of the material that doesn't contribute anything, I simply cut it off and shaped it to be a bit nicer. And as you might have guessed, as I was holding the angle grinder, I proceeded to grind welds that I thought needed a bit of TLC. It was finally time to flip the table over onto its legs for the first time. I reinstalled the extension machine and it was time to examine the functionality. It was quite exciting to try out the folding legs for the first time and see whether they worked as I had simulated in the CAD model. However, something didn't seem to be as I had intended. That's when I noticed that I had made a mistake. I needed to check whether the mistake was a showstopper, an annoyance, or perhaps even an improvement. Turns out it was an annoyance. It didn't break or prevent anything, but it sure didn't improve things either. We also did a few other tests, primarily relating to the rigidity of the table. And I couldn't help myself, so I did a bit of leveling of the top too. It felt good. I thought today was going to be the final day of version 1.0, or at least the final beta gold member. Groovy, baby. But it turns out it's not. I sidetracked a little bit by reinforcing the attachment points for the legs. It's done something, but maybe it was a little bit futile. The status of the table at the moment is that it is perfectly usable. The legs fold and you can put it away and you can adjust the top. That's all good. However, there's a few improvements that would be very good. First of all, it does wobble. Luckily I have these tabs here for holding the legs. I might end up just making a little strip of metal that attaches to here. This is the CAD model, and you know, the saying that it works on CAD, and everything would have been fine if I would have followed the CAD model. Now if we place the CAD model in the same alignment as the table is, you can see that these sticky out bits here mimic the castors down there, and the folding is correct. But if you then turn the CAD model, if you rotate it around in 3D space, you'll see these symbols here signifying castors, and then if you check the real model, the castors are here, not there. Luckily the castors are on the sticky out bit machine, so that means that I can take this out and I can use the welding table to remove them, and then I can take the other one off and put it back on. We tried to put weight on it, i.e. me, and it didn't deflect in a bad manner. I think it deflected a little bit, well it should do, but nothing that would be concerning enough to put my project out of spec. So then another thing I want to do is I want to sand the top. I want to run a belt sander over it because these slats aren't super flat anyway, and I don't like the surface, so I want to get this surface a little bit nicer. One of the final things I want to do, I want to run the metal circular saw along the edge to square up the edge. I deliberately made these support bars here out of flat bar. One of the reasons is that I can hook clamps onto them like that. The other reason is that the angle grinders sit on them like that too. So I was hoping to make use of this magnetic tool tray, and it seems like it'll sit there just fine, but it will sit here even better. This could be useful for measuring equipment and things like that you don't want to have on the table. So it looks like I have at least one more day of work to do, but it's looking pretty good so far, and I'm pretty pleased. Okay, boys and girls, another day in the Empire of Dirt. I'm not feeling it today either. I'm sorry for moaning and complaining all the time. But there used to be a time when I took a great interest, great pride in finishing projects off. I spent a long time making sure they were just right, that they were just the thing. That, you know, when I was done, I always kept asking myself, can I make it a little bit better? Is there anything I can improve upon? And I would do that, and my projects would take forever, but they would turn out quite nice. Since my depression, on the other hand, I'm kind of like just stressing things. My brain's all over the place, and I really just want to get things done. So it's a big struggle for me to try to achieve the result and the perfection that I'm hoping to achieve. But, you know, I thought I'd just mention that, because if there's other people out there who's had depression or have depression and are experiencing the same thing, just mention it down in the doobly-doo, because I think that we need to make these things a little bit more open and have people aware that these things happen. Anyway, I'm gonna move the casters and make the leg stabilizers, extensions, reinforcements, whatever they're called, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So hopefully I'll find a little bit of zen moment and I manage to get a good job done. Anyway, on with it. I used various rotary erasers to get rid of that embarrassing mistake there. So now nobody will know that it even was wrong at some point. So now I need to attach them obviously to the other side. Let's talk about mistakes briefly. I don't want you to be afraid of mistakes. Sure, do your best to avoid them, but don't let the fear of making mistakes prevent you from making things. In the wonderful world of fabric hobbling, if you have a welder and a grinder, you can add and subtract material. In this case, I doubt you could even tell that I made this mistake by examining the welding table. The cost of this mistake was mostly time. Some welding wire and a bit of wear on the grinding discs is almost negligible. Nothing that will permanently scar me. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, they can be fixed quite easily. Go forth and weld, brothers and sisters. I reused the tabs and then I used a hot metal glue gun to stick the bottom one on, and now I'm using the flat face of the fireball tool thingy here to clamp that on, and then I use the square to make sure that this edge is square to that. Then I have these tabs that will be welded onto there like that. So I'm going to remove that now, and then I'm going to weld those two together, and then I'm going to weld the diagonal onto there so that gives a little bit more strength. Don't know if that's needed, but makes me feel a bit better. The table casters are now on the correct side, I hope. That only took me about 3-4 hours to fix or something, but I guess the result is nice. So let's put those slats back on and see what the next step is. Table reinforcement thingies, I think. It's time to do some leg triangulation. This here is a tab for holding legs up in the folded position, and it's handily right there for me to use for this purpose of actually making a triangle thingy. With a little bit of luck, it should only be a few holes and a few bars and minimal welding and things like that. So let me start by marking some out and having a proper look. I think I have a plan. My initial thought was that I'd just use a flat bar from the pivot point to the leg and be done with it like that. However, this hole isn't 8 millimeters, and an 8mm bolt and an 8mm hole isn't very accurate anyway. So if the whole idea of this is to make it not wobble from side to side, then I shouldn't be trusting the bolt hole to be keeping it tight. It might work, but it might also not. So I think I'm going to use a plate here, and I'm going to make some stuffs on the side so it can't move, and then I will connect that plate to probably an angle bar that mounts onto here, and I'll do a similar thing on the other side. So there's a very shallow V shape here, but the idea is that there will be as few moving parts as possible, therefore it'll be as rigid as it can be within reason. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the holes in the legs whilst I have the table flipped like this. Then I'm going to weld this centerpiece, and then I'm going to figure out the rest of it. The plan is to make another part of this brace to go to the other leg, as you know, but I've made one so far, and I thought it would be interesting for you to see what a difference one brace makes. Before this brace, this was a parallelogram. That's why it kept moving. Now there's a triangulation here, and it basically doesn't want to move. There you go. Thanks to this one triangulation, it is that much stronger. It's unbelievable what one single triangulation does. this is how the brace turned out. I used a extension nut there, and that's one of the long nuts, and then just a plate here which is tabbed on the side of this brace, and then I used another nut there which spaces that out, so that one is locked that way, and that one is locked that way, and this one is locked that way, and the actual brace itself is actually quite sturdy too. So I'm going to do a Vandel test just to show you the stability of it. Vandel test number 1. That seems to be solid enough. Wiggle wiggle. Do I dare say that the table's pretty much ready? No, you do not dare say that. I should spend a few minutes cutting down the bolts and making sure that they are okay. The next thing I think is on the to-do list is to level the whole thing and then sand the top and cut the edges. But another day. Anyway. Yeah, I need to go wash. I'd like to confidently say that today is the last day I'm going to be working on the welding table. However, my track record doesn't really align with that sort of firm statements. It's been 10 days since I last worked on it, and yeah, it hasn't been very good days, but let's leave the moaning and complaining at that. The things that are left to do is to level the frame and then level the top and then sand the top. Then I want to cut the edges straight, and I also probably want to make a few marks, scratch in a few marks on the top to have a little bit of a datum or whatever you want to call it, so that I can align things well on the table. Apart from that, it's pretty much good. That doesn't mean it'll get done today though. But let's give it a go and see what happens. Here I am merrily starting to level the table using the leg adjusters. I keep extending the pair to the right in the frame until I almost unscrew them. Turns out the floor is more uneven than I thought. There's actually 20mm difference between the legs. Better make some floor adjusters then. After a slightly inappropriate amount of time, I have made these floor adjusters for the leg adjusters. And to prevent the leg adjusters from just simply falling off, I dished them out a bit. However, that wasn't really the design I was aiming for. But let's not be too hung up about that. Let's see if they actually work. I have now leveled the frame to a reasonable level of levelness. The next step is to level the slats. Welcome to the Flat Table Society. What I want to show to you here is that the table is now fairly flat. This is 0.15 millimeters, 0.1 millimeters and 0.05 millimeters. So there's 0.05 millimeters in it. This one is the aim. So I wanted to show you that if I use the middle one here, then I'm pretty okay. If I use the 0.5, sorry, that one was 0.5, then yeah, in many places it's okay. If I use the 0.15, then it definitely does not go in. But the annoyance here is that these bars are not flat. The slats are not flats. So let's see if I can. So I'm using the 0.05 millimeter one, and I'm going to the edge, and there at the edge it's binding, and it's binding a bit more at that edge. I want to do this side, and this one seems to be pretty flat, which is good. This one is also pretty flat, and that one binds in the middle there. Yeah, here's probably a bad example. Binds like there, binds on that side. I got a bit distracted there. I'm not happy with this. I'm gonna redo it. Now, because it's year 2020 and the world might end at any time, I am going to have to stop adjusting it. I probably could adjust it to the end of time, which might be any moment, but I feel that I might be chasing some issues that has to do with these slats not being flat. And talking of that, let me try to show that to you. So as you can see, I have my straightish edge here, and this here is the 0.05 millimeter feeler gauge, and I wanted to show you that if I press it in on the side here, it binds. Press it in on the side here, it doesn't even go in, but it goes in really well in the middle here, and then it even starts binding around here. So it binds there and binds there. So when you are measuring from different angles, it means that you might be measuring in the gully or the ridges or whatever the deformation of this is. So again, binds, completely binds. So it's very difficult to make sure that you're not chasing a flaw in the bars or a flaw in the adjustment. So that's why I'm going to sand it. The belt sander didn't work, so I resorted to the flat disc on the angle grinder, which is definitely not a precision instrument. So to do a little bit of compensation for that, I resorted to elbow grease, 80 grit sandpaper, 2 sheets of it, and this is now the result. The surface is flatter and the ridges are gone. mostly. So I'm now going to re-level it and see what the score is. I have re-leveled the surface and it was surprisingly level. So even with my violence with the angle grinder and leaning on it and sanding it and all that stuff, it didn't go out of true much, and I suspect that the amount that it went out of true was because I removed the ridges. On the two parallel sides I have an accuracy of less than 0.05 millimeters. I'm gonna call that good. There is some unevenness when I go in diagonal ways. I don't really have the time, energy or need to flatten it completely. I checked it and I think that at worst it would be 0.1 or 0.15 millimeter discrepancy when going diagonally. I'm just gonna call it good enough for now. What I'm doing now is I'm trying to establish a center line on the table so that I can establish a width of the slats. I'm using the Fireball weird square number 3 or whatever it is called. I have made the tab perpendicular with that, which means that I can put it down in between the slats and I can pull it to the center, and then I can score the top there. So I've scored it in 4 places on each side of the U channel, and I will now just measure them and make sure that they're the same width, and then I'm gonna halve that and we will see where I find a center line. Then I'm probably gonna score that. I've now marked out the center. I've also marked out the place where I'm going to cut the slats off. I've clamped down one of the track saw guides. So the idea is to just run the saw along the edge here, and hopefully that would work. Obviously once I've done this side I need to repeat it on the other side. But that's the plan anyway. One word about this saw. This is a metal cutting circular saw. It's fantastic. The way it cuts is just so beautiful. Let's cut. 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 See, there was a reason why I didn't say that this would definitely, for guarantee, for show, be the last day. It's so close. I think we could call it finished. The things I'd like to do is, there are some bolts on the table that are a little bit long, so I just want to chop them off. I'd also like to weld on the ground tab for the welder, so it has got a dedicated spot to go. Maybe some other small things, but for now this is pretty much usable. If we're gonna go into the completely useless, but it would make my inner perfectionist very happy, then I would like to flatten the slats even more. As you can probably see, there's still marks on them from the hot drawn process or whatever it is. So I think that if I had a proper sander, I could sand them down a little bit more. That would probably be absolutely pointless because as it stands, it's pretty flat. I would like to make a holder for welding torches. I would probably also like to make a tray for measuring tools and stuff like that, and I'd like to make that out of expanded steel so that it doesn't catch too much dirt. Would be very handy to put somewhere instead of having it on top of the table. I would probably also like to drill a few holes in a very accurate position so that I can make some jigs or something like that onto it. I'd like to make a place, or I'd like to adapt my trusty old vise so that it could go on here. I've seen some guy made a thingy where the vise slides in between the slats. I'd like to put on some spirit levels on it so that I can quickly at least do the basic leveling that way. There's probably some more holders and things like that that I could also add. But as a welding table, this is fully functional. But right now, we're rapidly approaching midnight, so it's clean up time for me, and let's get some grub and then catch some Zeds. Not the guy from Pulp Fiction, just, you know, the metaphorical sleep thingies. I reckon that is enough about a simple table like this. Well, how should I put this? Since recording this episode and editing it, there's been some work going on. I made a removable base for the vise, I added the spirit levels, I painted the floor with some Smurf goo, I made a dedicated toolkit, I sanded some more, yes, I sanded some more, and I leveled it even more. I've also got a lot of presentation style footage about how it works and other nerdy details. If you'd like to see more of this, please leave a comment and I might make another episode about this welding table. I think that's enough talking about a little hodgepodge table like this. I hope you found it inspiring. I hope that you've seen some solutions that maybe you want to implement in your welding table. Hopefully this table will stand as a base for future projects. If this is the first video you've seen on my channel, This is just one of the weird and wacky projects that I tend to do. Thanks ever so much for watching. Hope to see you next time. If not, that's fine. Take care, lads and lassies. Ta-ta.